Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Auburn Samru, and I'm a member of the Women in Science Committee at the Martinos Center of MGH. And I'm joined by my committee member for Women in Science, Paige Sparks, and we are super excited to introduce Dr. Jessica Esquivel today, who has kindly agreed to share her story and let us pick her brain about her life and career across many intersecting identities. We want this session to be fairly informal and act as a learning experience for everyone, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout the next hour. And while Dr. Esquivel has graciously agreed to answer questions as honestly as possible, please be respectful of her life and privacy as well. So now I will turn it over to Dr. Esquivel to start us off. So can you please just give us a little overview, tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Dr. Jessica Esquivel. I am a particle physicist working at Fermilab. I work on an experiment called the muon G-2 experiment, and we study muons. And muons are like the heavier sibling of an electron. So they have a lot of similar characteristics, but they're heavier. And we're using muons to probe beyond our knowledge. So to probe beyond what we call the standard model of particle physics. So we watch a whole bunch of muons dance in our experiment, which is a big old magnet about 50 feet in diameter. And we really pay attention to the choreography. Muons like to spin like a spinning top in a magnetic field. And there's this really weird quantum mechanical property of virtual particles or quantum foam popping up into existence when you're in a vacuum. And we have a pretty good idea of which particles should be popping in, but by really focusing in on that choreography of muons, we can tell when something unexpected or new or exotic has just popped into our vacuum. So it's really exciting. It's a very precise measurement that we're taking. So it makes everything really hard, but fun. Before that, I worked on an experiment called microboon, and I studied ghostly particles called neutrinos. They were also really pesky and hard to study, but that's what makes them fun. I identify as Black, Mexican, a woman, and lesbian. So there's a lot of intersecting identities. And I have a lot of experience being the only or one of few, which we can definitely, discuss and talk about. But I do want to highlight that I am not Einstein. I still have a really hard time doing like simple math sometimes. And I just really want to emphasize that if I can do this really difficult, cutting edge, on the bleeding edge of our physics knowledge work, anybody can do it. So yeah, I'll end there.
That's really amazing. It sounds like you're doing some pretty cool stuff that's going a little bit over my head, but you're making me feel like I can do it too. Can you take us through how you got there, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you dealt with like choosing colleges, grad programs, things like that?
Yeah. So I am Texas born and raised. I come from a small town called McAllen, and they're kind of like blink and you miss it towns. So we group all of our little towns into the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley. If you imagine Texas in your head, just go all the way south. And that's where I'm from. So bordering Mexico. It's a really vibrant community that is a melting pot of Mexicanos and Texans, and we create kind of our own Tex-Mex language there where we dip in and out of Spanish. I was really interested in STEM at a very young age. I used to spend a lot of time with my aunt. I'm gonna call her out by name, Thea Annie, because she always gets mad that I never say her name. So Thea Annie, my aunt, and I used to watch a whole bunch of sci-fi shows and movies. And in one of those shows, there was an astronaut in space fighting aliens, trying to fix a spaceship to get out of the mess that he was in. And there was an astrophysicist at NASA on the ground, really quirky, had a whole bunch of like action figures on his desk. And in my eyes was the true hero of the story. So I was too scared to be an astronaut, but I thought the astrophysicist was pretty cool. So at a really young age, around 5 or 6, I would be walking around saying, I'm gonna be an astrophysicist when I grew up. Tripping over the word, obviously, but it was really at that time that my family realized, okay, math and science may be her thing. And even though I didn't know what that word meant, I attribute me on this path of being a physicist to my family because they encouraged that interest. They took me to NASA, they put me in math and science camps. They just really enforced and encouraged that interest. So it's hat tip to them. So on that path, I went to NASA with my family when I was about 12, 13-year old. And we took the VIP tour. So I'm from Texas, so we went to NASA in Houston, and we were able to see what astrophysicists actually did. And there were no aliens on screens, no astronauts floating around yelling, Houston, we have a problem. And it was kind of boring. So I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to do this. But it was on that trip that we went to the area, the big old pool where they put a shuttle underwater and simulate zero gravity. And they, explained that engineers were helping astronauts, learn how to fix things in outer space. And I was like, okay, I can be an engineer. So I went to college to become an electrical engineer, took my first physics course, and it was full circle. I fell in love with physics and went ahead and double majored in electrical engineering and applied physics. So it's really interesting to see not only a TV show is what sparked my interest in STEM in general, but having that continued encouragement throughout, me growing up to continue my path in this field. And then how physics became my love, my passion in the end. So I'm not an astrophysicist, I'm a particle physics physicist, but we work hand in hand. So yeah.
That's amazing. It seems like you knew what you wanted to do forever. Did you ever have any doubts along that pathway or dip into anything else that you had interested in?
Yeah. So in undergrad, I went to a minority serving institution, predominantly Hispanic. It was St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. So even though in many of my classes I was one of few or the only, I had a sense of community in the broader scheme that allowed me to push back on notions or ideas or people that told me that I couldn't do it. And one of the biggest pushbacks I got was in deciding that I wanted to double major in electrical engineering and applied physics. While I had a very, very supportive advisor, mentor, and sponsor in the physics department, he essentially reworked schedules, semester schedules, to make sure that I was able to get the courses I needed in time. So he was just amazing. So even though I had that in the physics department, I really had to advocate for myself in the engineering department that it was something that I could do. And it was also something that I could do in 4 years, right? But I think because of the community, because I felt like I was part of something bigger at that university, I felt confident in saying, no, just wait. I got this. I can do 21 hours a semester. Just watch. But when I went to graduate school, I went to Syracuse University. So it was no longer in Texas, flying by the seat of my pants, you know, in a different state. The cold weather was a shock. And I was literally the only Black person, the only woman, the only lesbian, the only Mexican in my cohort. So that was so jarring. And having to deal with being the only, on top of really complicated coursework, on top of imposter syndrome, essentially thinking that they let me in because of my identities and not because I deserve to be there. And then having the outside world kind of push you further into that imposter syndrome, just cues of you not belonging, people asking to show your ID, you know, when you come into the physics building, and even outside of like my university sphere. For I don't know how to explain it, but everybody thinks the South is racist, right? For me, it wasn't until I moved up north that I got hit with microaggressions on the regular every day, no matter where I was. And it was just exhausting to try and combat all of that and still do well in my courses. So that was really, really hard. And I almost quit. I failed my qualifying exam the first time, and I was about to quit. But I was there on a fellowship, and the head of the fellowship, we had a meeting, and she let me know the statistics of Black women getting their PhDs in physics. And at the time, I think it was around 85, 86. Dr. Shonda Prescott Weinstein had just made news for being the 62nd or the 68th Black woman to get her PhD in physics. And it was at that point that I realized this is no longer just for me. This is bigger than me. And I have a whole world, a whole society telling me that I can't do it. So there was no way in hell I was gonna quit once I found that out. I'm a really, really stubborn person, and that was just the spark, just the fire I needed to get through. And I knew that I belonged there. Like, I knew that I was good enough. I had done research since my summer of freshman year in undergrad. I'm able to take really complicated, you know, projects and perform. So I just needed that spark. Yeah.
That is absolutely wonderful. So you talked about imposter syndrome quite a bit, and we've had a couple sessions on imposter syndrome within our center, but it's been a little while. Can you give us some examples of how you combated imposter syndrome? Because I, for one, definitely would like to know. I'm sure there's some more people out there, because we are also in a pretty tough academic setting. So let's share the knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I think imposter syndrome, it's hard. I don't think there's one way one way to combat it. Yeah, I think the hardest part, especially being underrepresented in your field, is that not only do you have your internal brain telling you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you can't get this done, why did you even do this, you could be doing, you know, something way easier and just coasting. So you have that internal monologue in your head, right? And I think for that, really just actively shutting it down by really hyping yourself up. right? Like Mindy Kaling does a really good job of just hyping herself up. Issa Rae does a really good job of hyping herself up. And I think you need just the complete other end of the spectrum to like level yourself out. But that's all just internal talk, right? That's all just what's going on in your head. As an underrepresented, minoritized individual in a field, you also have societal cues and outside factors that are telling you you don't belong, that are telling you that you're not smart enough, that question your intelligence and question, you know, your ability to do the job. That also feeds into people's imposter syndromes. And that is not a single person or the underrepresented minoritized individual's fault. That is a societal issue. And we, as our own little environments, mine is the physics community, we need to actively also be combating these microaggressions and these ideas of a certain person is the only person that can be doing this work, or they're the only people that are smart enough to continue through their PhD and get a career. So there needs to be both that's happening. And I would say everybody suffers at some point in their career with imposter syndrome. But add to that the societal cues that are telling you you don't belong, you don't belong, you don't belong. That's what makes it harder for people that look like me to stay in the field.
Absolutely. My go-to is usually sarcasm of course I can make it here, that kind of thing. Earlier, you also touched on having a mentor in your physics department. Can you talk a little bit more about your mentor's role and the difference between mentorship and sponsorship for you?
Yes, that's a really good question. So my sponsor and mentor in undergrad, his name was Dr. Richard Cardenas. And the way I see the difference between mentorship and sponsorship is that a mentor will, you know, answer your questions, look at your resume, and really be there for you when you need advice. But a sponsor steps it up a notch, right? Like I said, Dr. Cardenas rearranged the physics course schedule for me and a couple of other dual majors to make sure that we were able to get all of our courses in within the 4 years. That's stepping it up, right? He reached out to his contacts and connections at different universities across the country to make sure that every single one of us had an internship all summers of our college career, right? He made sure that we were going to conferences where he knew somebody that we needed to network with or that we needed to connect with because it would further advance our career. So he really took a vested interest in each and every one of us and stuck his neck out and his reputation for us because he truly believed in us, in his students. So that's like definitely a sponsor versus a mentor, and he's still doing that. Like I still have him reach out to me and say, I have 2 students that are really good in XYZ. They want an internship. Who can we talk to? How can we connect? How can we make this happen? And I think it's really, really important to have both mentors and sponsors in your life, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am today. Like all of the internship opportunities that he connected me with made me the physicist I am today. It taught me how to code. It taught me how to do data analytics and, you know, analyze big questions and siphon them into, you know, results. So it was definitely because of him that I'm here. And I had the same type of mentors and sponsors in graduate school as well that stepped up when I was about to quit, when I didn't think that I could pass the qualifying exam, that believed in me as a physicist and as a researcher, and stepped up and created a group of underrepresented minoritized individuals that were struggling in grad school so that we could build community, because that's something that I didn't have. And we studied together, and it wasn't just student-led. Like we had Duncan Brown, who's at Syracuse, and Mitch Soderberg, who was my graduate student advisor step up and help us learn these concepts that we're going to be tested on in our qualifying exam. So you need those people in your corner that believe in you as a student, as a researcher, and in my case, as a physicist.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What do you think was the best advice you received from a mentor or a sponsor? Or multiple pieces, because there's probably a lot.
Yeah. So I think the first one would have to be my mom, actually, which is a little off kilter. But yeah, her and I are tight, and she always gives really good advice. But it was during graduate school and like beginning my, actual research path. So right after my quals and I'm actually doing research, I had a conversation with her where I was really just worried about being this model minority, right? So making sure that I represented all of my minoritized identities, to the best of my ability, because I was the only one. And if I falter and if I fall, I'm messing with the whole community coming after me, right? And it was, you can imagine, it was a big weight, especially in physics. It's built on failure. You're supposed to, practice a scientific method, come up with a hypothesis, test it. If it fails, pivot. And having this mentality of being a model minority didn't allow for me to actually grow as a scientist, because I was always so scared of asking questions for fear of looking stupid, or for fear of being found out as not smart enough to be having these conversations. And her advice, well, it wasn't really advice. She essentially said, who made you queen of all of these identities? And it was just that little tidbit of, you're right. Like, I can be unapologetic and my authentic self, and I don't need to represent everybody else that's coming before or after me. Like, I am me, and my experiences are my own, and the fact that I am the only shouldn't be the burden that I need to carry. And it needs to be the environment, that needs to change, so that more people that look like me with different, experiences and ideas and innovative thoughts can come to the table and help, with these really amazing questions that we're trying to answer. Who made me queen of all of these identities?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to take that to heart. I'm going to take one from your mom.
Yeah.
We do have a question from the audience. The burden of model minority, imposter syndrome, and societal attributes that minorities don't belong in STEM seems to represent a tremendous psychological burden on trainees. Do you have any advice for trainees who may be feeling the weight of so many of these pressures?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that I'm still combating. Like, honestly, I am very early on in my career, and I still feel like an imposter. But I would definitely say just being unapologetic in yourself, and bringing all of you to your work. There's really this mentality that you have to separate yourself from your profession. And as a younger Jessica, I really tried to do that. When I took a gap year between undergrad and graduate school, and worked as a contractor for the Air Force in Texas. So I was not out at that job. And it really did affect my work, because I was so worried about making sure that I was using gender neutral pronouns so as not to out myself. I was so worried about, even having discussions or conversations around my personal life because I was scared of coming out. And that took so much of my mental capacity in just talking around my personal life that I didn't have that to actually do the science and to actually do the physics. So as scary as it is to bring your whole self, just being unapologetic in who you are frees your brain, honestly, to actually be thinking about other things. There's obviously issues that we need to fix in our ecosystem. And I am really vocal in advocating for equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice in the physics realm. And that work needs to be done. But personally, what you can do is just kind of just be you and not worry about code switching and not worrying about being out in this space, but not being out in that space. I have gained power in that, in just being me. Yeah.
Very nice. I like the sense of empowerment you can get from being yourself, and hopefully that will empower other people to do the same. And then we can create a new epidemic or pandemic of being ourselves. Another question from the audience. How do you think early career investigators from diverse backgrounds can be ambitious in our future goals when the realities of glass ceilings are so ingrained in our psyches?
Ooh, that's a big question.
That's big. You can take a minute.
So I remain and am very hopeful for our future because I see young people community organize and community build. I see young people and they inspire me, being their, authentic selves and not code switching at work and just really leaning into who they are. And I think that that's what's going to break those glass ceilings, is people coming together as a community, realizing the power that they have and pushing on ecosystems and pushing on, the realms that they're in and advocating for themselves and gaining that agency that they have, right? So I think we're in unprecedented times of identifying glass ceilings and shattering them. So I'm really, really hopeful for the future because of the young people that are just so badass.
Well, I've got some good role models here. Speaking of young people, what advice would you give to a high school student looking to major in physics?
So I would say it's going to be hard. But easy things are rarely fulfilling. So I would say you don't have to be, like I said in the beginning, you don't have to be Einstein. You don't have to be wicked smart. You don't have to be able to, do complicated long division in your sleep. You just have to be curious. And you just have to want to ask questions. And to me, that's what a physicist is just asking questions and being curious. And if you are curious, you're on the right path. And don't let anybody else try and tell you that you're not smart enough or that you can't do that long division, so you shouldn't be in this field, because that's nonsense. So as difficult as it's going to be, try and tune out that noise, that nonsense, because as long as you're curious, as long as you ask questions, you can do it.
Great. We have another question all similarly along that vein. How would you advise young female scientists starting at a postdoc level who experience microaggressions and feel helpless or hostile?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I, yeah. um, I think one of the hardest things that I've had to learn is, one, to recognize when I'm in a hostile environment, and when I'm combating microaggressions or macroaggressions on the regular, and two, saying something, right? Because we have it's ingrained in our being as women to laugh it off, to not stir the pot, to be friendly, to be motherly, and to not be quote unquote aggressive, right? But in being your authentic self, in being unapologetic, you can gain access to that power and start checking people on their biases, start checking people on their privileges. And it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to sift through BS and conflict. But honestly, if you, yeah, if you don't, you're going to be in a traumatic space. And I'm not saying that you have to check people on their BS, on their bias, on their privilege. If you think that it's a lost cause, keep it moving. Like, find another place. Find a place where you can actually thrive and you're not just surviving, right? I think that that's really important, and that's what this is like the movement that I'm seeing from our young folks today, is that for me, there was this mentality that I need to get the job that's given to me. I need to be humble. I need to take it and be glad that I have a job. And that's not the case. We are a hot commodity, and we should be asking difficult questions to our employers, to our potential, employers, regarding climate, regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion, regarding, the initiatives that they're taking to make sure that their spaces mirror society as a whole. Like, we don't need to be just taking whatever's given to us on our lap. We can push back, and it's up to us to make sure that we're in a space that we feel fulfilled, that we feel safe, and that we feel like we can thrive.
It's very interesting. How do you find a balance between knowing when to teach someone and there's hope of them converting or being teachable, and when to move on and give it up?
I think that is a personal question.
Yeah.
And it really depends on whether or not you feel safe in that space to even have that conversation. You'll know. Honestly, you'll know if it's a safe space for you to have that conversation. And I don't want anybody putting themselves at risk to be quote unquote changing the world. Like, you need to make sure that you are okay first. So yeah, I don't feel comfortable telling anybody when or where or how. Like,
Yeah,
they'll know.
that's great. It also helps a lot to have someone in your corner that will back you up there.
For
And it
sure.
sounds like your mentors and sponsors were definitely there for you.
Yeah.
All right, we've got some more from the audience. How have you dealt with failures or setbacks in your career?
I think I'm getting much better at doing that now. When I was a student, it was like, oh my God, my world is crashing down on me. I can't do this. I need to leave. Like, it was earth shattering. And one of the biggest failures, I think, was failing the quals, right? Like, that was huge. But you know, you get back on the horse and you continue to study. And for me, it was actually finding community to study with, which I didn't have at the beginning. Like, I was so scared of being found out as an imposter that I studied alone. I did my homework alone. I cried on the phone with my mom because I couldn't figure out the homework. I mean, it was exhausting. There were a lot of late nights where I was just beating my head on Jackson, that book. And it was hard. But once I found community, once I was able to ask questions and just really be a scientist, right? Just be curious. I saw that that's what I was missing. And I saw that I could perform much better when I was working as a group with people, when I was asking questions, when I was being curious, when I put my guard down. I was finally able to pass. So yeah.
Very good. It seems like community played a huge role in your life, as most of the time it does.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your work-life balance and how you integrate yourself in your work? As you said, bring your whole self to work, and how that translates into your life and hobbies and interests away from work.
Yeah. I advocate hard for work-life balance, but if you were to talk to my wife, she'd say that I'm terrible at work-life balance. So maybe I shouldn't be answering this question. But I think, yeah, I need to get better. I think it's really important to have something outside of work that you're just as passionate about. Right now, mine is equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So doing panels like this. Right now, I am a co-founder of the Black in Physics movement that's going to be happening the last week of October, and working on planning upwards of 10 events that week, spanning undergrad to faculty. So that's what I'm doing in my spare time right now. It's still work. I need to work on my work-life balance, but I do have passions. I love still reading sci-fi books, young adult sci-fi novels. I'm the big kid in that section, pulling my next, book. I love watching still sci-fi shows. I cosplay. I think that's so much fun. And anything DIY related, that's my jam, which also my wife is annoyed about, because usually that means I'm tearing something up, leaving it all over the house, and it takes months for me to put it back together. So what are you gonna do? That's love.
And you put it back together in the end, so I guess it works out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have any advice on finding community and finding mentors, especially if you can't find that directly in your lab or in your classes?
Yeah, I've actually found social media to be really impactful in me finding community. One of the projects I did over the summer was a video project highlighting Black women in physics across career spectrums. And what I did was just create a Facebook group to bring all of these women together and start asking if they wanted to be a part of this project. And that little message group was my lifesaver during these past couple of months with COVID and the civil unrest and the police killings. It was a lifesaver. The amount of community and joy and just laughter that we were able to bring each other was so necessary in these hard times. And that was organically created. And it's so cool to see how it can just pop off, especially right now during, the debates and just bring each other laughter in these really hard times. So I definitely, and it was something that was created because I just wanted to do a video project. So I encourage everybody to, like, if you're not finding that community, make it, you know, reach out to people, because I can 100% guarantee there are other people in your field that look like you, that don't have community, that will so appreciate it too.
Wonderful. And now's a great time to connect with people all over the place, not just those who are right next to you.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. We've got another one from the audience. Can you comment on the burden or expectation placed on Black and Brown trainees to take on disproportionate roles in diversity roles in academic medicine and the scientific community?
Yes. I can't talk about academic medicine, but I could definitely talk about the scientific community. It's a lot. It's a lot. My inbox is inundated on the daily to be on this panel, to be this keynote, to talk to this mentee. The amount of labor that the community expects us to do for free is ridiculous. And it's irritating to hear, you know, diversity messages say, we value diversity. We want you to work here because we think, you know, diversity is important to our scientific community. But then when push comes to shove and they're leaning on Black and brown folk like me to do the training and to find people to fill positions, yet they don't want to pay me for this work, for this expertise, it's frustrating. You can't say you value it and then put nothing behind it. So that's my soapbox on that, is it's fine, you know, to tap us for our experience and our expertise, but pay people. And at the same time, I always come into a room saying that this is my experience as a Black Mexican, you know, lesbian woman in physics. That's niche, right? This is my experience and mine alone. You can't take what I'm telling you and generalize it for the whole Black community, or generalize it for the whole Hispanic and Latinx community, et cetera, et cetera. There are experts, social scientists, you know, that study this. Let's tap them. Let's not reinvent the wheel or think that we're experts in a specific field. Let's go to actual experts who study this, who have gotten their, you know, masters and PhDs in this work. Like, pay them too.
Absolutely. And especially when those things are going on and they're asking for your expertise, it's also taking away from the work that you could be doing and publishing, and that's not taken into account either.
Yeah. And
So.
it's also looked at as a detriment when you're moving forward in your career. When I was applying to postdocs, I realized maybe second or third year in graduate school that I needed to be doing science communication. I needed to be doing community engagement, or physics wasn't fulfilling for me. I needed to be able to communicate what I was doing in the lab to a community that looked like me for it to be fulfilling. I tried for 3 years not to do that, and I suffered. Community is really important to me, and I recognize that. So, you know, for the next 3 years, I built up a pretty substantial community engagement list. And all of that went into my CV and into my resume. So when I was applying for positions, it was a detriment. The questions that I would get were, well, you spent so much time, you know, on community engagement. This position isn't for that. It's for science. I had just an impressive science, you know, whatever on my resume. But the first question is, well, she spent too much time on this. She could have been doing more on this. And it was really frustrating to hear that on multiple occasions. Is maybe you should par down on the community engagement work that you're highlighting on your resume, on your CV, because that's not, that's not in our job description. And that is a problem, right? As scientists, especially in my field where I'm getting paid by taxpayer money, one of the job descriptions should be, you can communicate your science to a general audience. I'm getting paid by y'all. I'm getting paid by, the general audience. If I can't communicate what I'm doing to you all, I'm not doing very good at my job. So that is another issue in physics that we need to be pushing away from, is acknowledging and appreciating community engagement and science communication.
Absolutely, because it also means you're bringing in the next generation of scientists who are looking up to you.
Exactly.
And I'm glad my taxpayer dollars are going to you. Kind of branching off of that, another question from the audience. It sounds like bringing your whole self to work has overall been a really positive experience. I was wondering what it was like for you to come out at work, and if there were any negative experiences as a result, and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I made a very calculated decision going into grad school that I was going to be out. At that moment in time, Em and I had been dating for 2 years. It was serious. I knew that she was going to be the one. And we were moving across the country from Texas to New York, and not going to be in the same city. So there were already going to be like stressors on our relationship because of the long distance, long distance-ness that we were about to embark on. And I knew that trying to keep a really important part of my life secret was going to be detrimental to that relationship. So I made a very calculated decision that this is not something that I'm going to have to, that I want to deal with. So I wouldn't say it's being multifaceted, being intersectional. It's really hard to decipher whether or not this microaggression is because you're a woman, or this microaggression is because you're a lesbian or Black. And that's, one of the burdens of being underrepresented, is now that you have to spend mental capacity trying to figure out all of this nonsense. But one of the things that I vividly remember, I can't pinpoint who, but I remember going into the grad space that we had, and the first thing a guy said was, "Ooh, fresh meat. Are you single?" And I remember responding, "No, I have a girlfriend." And it was like, oh, I'm no longer interested. So I can obviously attribute that to being a lesbian, but it was really irritating that was the first bit of nonsense out of somebody's mouth just because I was a woman coming into that space. So yeah, that was really frustrating. I think I forgot the question. I don't know if I answered it.
No, you got it. You're good.
Okay.
So in academia, people don't get paid quite as much as they'd like to sometimes. If you're comfortable, would you like or be willing to talk about financials and how you paid for undergrad and grad school and things like that for our younger audience out here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the first thing I didn't know was that if you go get your PhD in a STEM related field, they pay you to do it. That's something that was not in my vernacular. Like, I didn't know that. And that was actually a conversation / argument that I had with my mom when I told her I wanted to get my PhD in physics, because she was like, no, I am not going to pay for you to be a perpetual student. I don't have that kind of money. You don't have that kind of time. You need to get a job. And when I told her, no, mom, they'll pay me. And she's like, hey, who do you think you are? I've never heard of that. That's not true. So it was definitely like a conversation that we had to have. But it's true. They do pay you to go to school. Mind you, it's not, not going to be living the high life. It's bare minimum. But it is enough to hold you over, and it is money for you to live off of, to do something that you really love. As far as undergrad, I am about $60,000-$70,000 in debt from that. It's a mess. It's not fun, right? I am not from big means as far as finances. There was a lot of student loans that I had to take out. There was a lot of student loans my mom had to take out. I had a cosigner in my aunt for one of my private loans, which, like, if you don't need to get private loans, just don't get private loans, because the interest on those are insane. But sometimes you need to, right? And that's because half of my tuition was paid, at least half of my tuition was paid from scholarships. And I'm still $60,000-$70,000 in debt, right? It sucks. Hopefully the next administration tackles this issue. But yeah, finances are hard. And I touched on the fact that, grad school, your grad school allotment or money is bare minimum, right? One of the things that I did during my grad school is actually work at a retail store. I worked at Lane Bryant. I loved it. It was a place, again, where I could build community of women, of women of color who liked fashion, who liked makeup, and it was completely different than me being in my physics space. So it was super, super fulfilling. And it gave me a little bit of money that I needed to pay for, rent, to pay for food, to pay for books. It was, yeah. While I was in it, I hid it because it was shameful to not be able to call up your mom and say, oh, I need another book. Can you buy this for me? And that was something that I didn't have. Like, my mom had already taken a whole bunch of loans out for my undergrad. So having this second job was shameful, and it shouldn't have been. Like, people need to recognize and understand that the barrier, the financial barrier to academia, it is there. That not everybody has PhD moms and dads, it's just a fact of life, and we need to recognize that.
Absolutely. And normalizing that it's okay to have a job and do what you need to do to sustain yourself will hopefully go quite a long way.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a last question from the audience real quick. Going back to the community engagement work, how did you handle the negative reaction to it from potential employers? Did you take the advice to give it less space in your CV, or did you change the way you talked about it in interviews? What would your advice be to people who are in that same situation?
That is a really good question. I didn't change it. I did that work. It was going on my CV. And I think I probably shifted the way I talked about it. Just how I emphasize right now the importance of science communication and community engagement. And I think as a physics society, we're moving towards recognizing and valuing that work. I'm not saying that it was me who did that. I'm just saying that we are moving towards that, recognition. I think I made it a point to look outside of my physics sphere to gain validation in the work that I was doing. So, I've done a lot of keynotes. I've done a lot of kind of high profile community engagement, which has landed me a position as an if-then ambassador, a AAAS if-then ambassador. And that is super, super high profile, like way more honestly that I'm comfortable with. But because other organizations have recognized the impact that I've had in the community, in a general sense, general audience sense, my employers are now, oh, okay, this is actually good for us. This actually puts us in a good light. So continue what you're doing. So now I have less pushback on doing, these community engagement projects, which are fulfilling for me. They give me a sense of purpose, and they allow me to keep my passion for the physics that I do, because any cool thing that I do here, I can then turn around and talk about how cool it is to, little Black and brown kiddos who are interested in STEM. So yeah, I would flip it on its head like that, and look at it as a way to highlight your institution and to highlight your organization. Because then if you're making them look good, they're not going to tell you. They ain't going to tell you nothing.
I love it. And we are going to end on you nerding out about your own work. We do have a last question. How are the particle showers and choreography detected? In what ways? Can you go into more details there?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Okay, so we have a particle beam of muons that we shoot through an inflector. So what an inflector does, it injects these muons into our big O magnetic ring, and it injects and inflects. So when each muon also has a pole, so it also reacts with a magnetic field. So if you don't have a space where you could kind of zero out the magnetic field, they're gonna just fly outside away from our magnet instead of inside where we want. So that's what the inflector does. So once we get it into our magnetic region, it's actually off kilter. So it's not on the orbit that we want. So then we have this subsystem called the kicker, and that's what I work on, and it kicks the muons back onto the correct orbit. So now we can store these muons. And we essentially, once we have them stored, we just watch them go around and spin as they're going around. And then we also have, it's a whole bunch of magnets, which is really fun because everybody loves magnets, right? We also have magnets that are called quadrupole magnets, and those squeeze the muons vertically to make sure that they don't spiral up or down. So we have the inflector that gets them in, the kicker that pushes them onto the orbit, and then we also have these quads that are pretty much around our magnetic ring that make sure we're not losing them up or down. Okay? And then we have what I like to call, they're like cameras. They're not really cameras, but they act like cameras. So muons, as they travel, they spontaneously decay into electrons and neutrinos. We don't really care about neutrinos, which is so weird for me because I spent 5 years of my life caring only about neutrinos. So now I'm on an experiment who, let the neutrino do its thing, we don't really care. So when muons decay into electrons, the electrons spiral into the center of our magnet. And in there, we have these 24 calorimeters or cameras that identify or keep track of where the electron comes in. So I think we also have another subsystem called the tracker, and essentially that's what it does. It tracks a muon as it's traveling through our big ring, and essentially it is that decay of a muon into an electron that gives us what we call a wiggle plot. And that wiggle plot, that frequency, is associated to the G factor, or the spinning of our muon. And if that wiggle plot shifts even just a little bit, so we're measuring this measurement to 140 parts per billion. So if it, yeah. So if it shifts a little bit, even a little bit, we can note that new physics just popped into our vacuum, our magnetic region. So I think that's everything about the experiment. Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your work and sharing your experience. Thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you around soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks for listening. This was a lot of fun.